So I am showing you our train environment. Everything I'm doing today will be in our train environment. You can feel free to work in your own environment. There's very little risk involved, in my opinion, working in PowerScheduler while we're walking through this. You might be a little hesitant, especially if you're new to the process, and that's understandable. You don't have to make any changes. This can be just a watch and learn for you. But understandably, if you're a little bit more experienced, you might be making the changes as we go along here, updating your screens and whatnot, updating your courses. You can do it that way too. I want to reassure everybody here before also that we get started that you've heard me say this before, you've heard our team members say this before. We host Power Scheduler work days, both virtually and in person, starting in January, mid-January, and we will host them a virtual every week and an in-person every week. And you're welcome to attend either or both at any time you want as a customer of ours. And the reason I say all that right now is that while I'll be walking you through how to use these online request screens, there's something to be said about wanting to sit down with team members on our team and kind of work through these processes together. So again, this is more of a watch and learn sort of atmosphere virtually. And then as you get to that point, if you do, and again, open to answering any questions you have on this call. But as you start to really work through these online screens, if you're redesigning them, if you are starting from scratch, I highly recommend coming to our workday and working with a team member on doing that once you've gone through the training. So that's kind of how I kind of consider this 2 hours the introduction to the concept, and then those work days are really for working through setting those up. So hopefully that's clear. I do want to mention that our documentation, I tend to always point this out at the beginning of our trainings, and some of you have heard it a million times. So I'm not going to go into it, but I do want to show you where our documentation resides. So that question mark is the PowerSchool help menu. If I clicked into that meta documentation, that's where you'll find our documentation, as well as a link to our calendar to sign up for current and future trainings and all those work days I just mentioned. Our work days are not on the calendar yet. So heads up, they go out on the calendar for registration 30 days prior. So I want to say that our first work days are the week of the 13th and 12th, 13th, or 14th, somewhere in there. So I bet this weekend they will be showing up on our calendar. Just the way we, have to set it up, we have to tell it how many days in advance it can go on the calendar, and we just give it a 30-day. So later this week, you should see those first work days start popping up. But if you were curious on what that schedule is looking like, we will be sending out to every scheduler a list of dates coming up soon, so you can kind of note on your calendar to remind yourself to set those up. I'm going
Even
to have
the
a team
first one
member.
is in Columbus, actually, on January 14th, just to let you know.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a virtual workday that week, Kim?
Oh, we do. We have the virtual work days on Wednesday, the 13th.
Great. So Wednesday the
Yep.
13th is our virtual. The 14th, which sounds like a Thursday then, is our in-person in Columbus. That's our first
It's actually
foray
Tuesday,
into
Wednesday.
Tuesday, Wednesday. Thanks for
Yeah.
the correction. Obviously
I
not
have
looking at a calendar.
on my
What's that,
calendar,
Mark?
I have the 15th. Excuse me.
Okay.
As a request, I don't know if that's been canceled or not.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the another version of this training on the 15th.
Mhm. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Um, all right. So getting back to documentation, I'm going to have a team member drop the list of documents into the chat for me. So the documents I'll be referencing are going to be listed into the chat. So if at any point you want to pick up those documents, you are welcome to do so. Um, you know, print them, have them in front of you, have them on your computer for reference. However, but those are available again always at that link right here. So almost everything I do this afternoon is going to be in PowerScheduler. There are slight exceptions to that. When I talk through some background course setup and prerequisites, but I'll get to that point later. I am going to start in PowerScheduler, and that's where we're going to spend the majority of this afternoon. So again, if you're in your own environment, feel free to enter into the PowerScheduler link. And I did that awful quick, so I'll do that again. PowerScheduler is found at Applications, PowerScheduler. And so in order for your students to make requests, the number one first thing that needs done is that you have to have a scenario in PowerScheduler. Again, majority of you have that. Even if you don't, that's okay. So note that I'm in Meta High School, again, a train environment, and we're just gonna assume or pretend that I do have a scenario set up. We've gone through that process several times on trainings. But what I want to point out is your course catalog is going to determine what courses are available to you. So we talk about that through the automated scheduler setup. And I'm just going to really quickly show this. You know which courses are available to you within PowerScheduler by looking in your course catalog. So course catalog's over here on the left, edit course catalog here in the middle. You can only edit a course catalog for the currently active course catalog, and that's what's attached to the current scenario. So I just wanted to show you whatever's checkboxed here is available to you in PowerScheduler. Whatever's unchecked is not available to you in PowerScheduler. Again, if you attended our automated scheduler setup, this is going to be a review. So just wanted to point that out though. So I cannot have students request anything that's unchecked here. Anything that I want students to be able to request, anything that I want to build in my schedule, and anything that I want students to load into eventually has to be checkboxed here. Unchecking a course here will remove it from availability in PowerScheduler. It does not remove it from the live side. It does not delete or remove from existence. It is only for PowerScheduler. This screen is only for PowerScheduler. So I always like to make that one clear. All right. We're not going to take any time today to go through and clean up this course catalog, but I did want to show you that. Where we are going to spend some time is between these two screens, screen setup and course groups. So again, something I mentioned earlier, just to start this part off, is that PowerSchool or PowerScheduler carries over year to year.
Hey, Stephen, I apologize. Can I interrupt just for a second? My name is Kristen Robbins. I'm working with, I'm learning about like the scheduling process here. And if we uncheck something, like say, I don't know, one of our sections of ELA at the high school, we're not going to offer that moving forward, but it's on a student, like we have someone that's going to be in the building and they have taken that. So say it's a senior, and will that be eligible or available to go on their transcript if we uncheck it, or is this just a power scheduling mechanism?
This page is specific to PowerScheduler and impacts nothing on the live side. So nothing on a transcript, nothing on a current student schedule. And I'll even go so far as to say that next school year, if you want to use that course again, it's still there, it's still available for next school year. All you're saying is that I don't need this in PowerScheduler.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and to clarify that a little bit further, PowerScheduler being the way you're going to schedule classes for next year from now until June. So again, if I'm scheduling something like my CCP Intro to Macroeconomics on the live side, such as I don't build sections of this class in PowerScheduler, students don't request it, students don't load into it, but sometimes in August, a student will walk into my office and say, hey, I'm taking Intro to Macroeconomics down at UC at Cincinnati. At that point, I will build a section. I will enroll that kid into it, but that's all done on the live side. In that example, I don't need this here. So,
perfect, thank you.
Yep, I'll caution everybody though. I wouldn't go crazy on this list and say, oh, I don't need any of these. You know, like I want you to think about this as a team, because there are some outside potential considerations for all that. And the number one example I can give you of that is a copy. If I'm the type of building that copies my master schedule and sections of these courses already exist, well, then I would advise you just to leave those checkboxed, because then when you're looking at your master schedule in PowerScheduler, you do want all those sections to show up. Otherwise, they'll show up as unknowns. So that would be, again, another reason to keep those active. But again, just the overall picture here, and to outright answer the question again, I'm not impacting anything on the live side by unchecking this, just for PowerScheduler. So, but I'm glad you asked that question, because I think other people in the room, I'm certain other people in the room are thinking the same thing. So thank you for the question. Any other questions about the course catalog? What should be checkboxed? What should not be? Okay. So again, these online request screens carry over from year to year. Now, there are 3 different ways to enter student requests into PowerScheduler. Requests being, and a lot of you have heard me say this before, requests are anything that you need to appear in a student schedule in PowerScheduler. I want students to load into that course. They need a request for that course, right? But the online screen setup isn't where all of our buildings put in the requests, but we do recommend it. It's the most efficient, effective, and kind of easiest way to get requests into the system. Plus, it gives your students a little bit of ownership over, quote, picking their classes. Because even when I'm talking to middle schools, which I know we have some on the call here, there may be very limited classes that a middle school student has to choose from. But if there's that one thing they get to choose, choir or band, or one of the fine arts, or more generally, they get to choose 3 electives out of 10, then you can even build that into these online request screens so that everything else is fairly predetermined, if not completely predetermined. And then they get that 1 or 2 or 3 choices. So that's why we'd recommend the online request screens. But before I go there, I do want to show you the other ways to get requests on students. And I think you're all familiar with this, but I think it's just good to point this out, because what's eventually going to happen is you're going to be in the middle of the scheduling season and you're going to get a new student in class. Now, if almost all of your students have already made their online requests, but you have a new enrollment student walk in the door, you need to get that new kid scheduled for next year too. So you need to enter his or her requests separately, right? Maybe you won't use the online request screens anymore because that time has passed. The deadline's passed. Again, 98, 99% of kids have put in their requests, but there's a couple of kids who didn't, and or new enrollment that needs requests put on them. So again, 2 other ways to do it. So I'm going to go to the students menu here under resources. And let's say that there's a new freshman that starts in school, and it's March right now. I've already gotten the majority of my requests in, but there's a new freshman. So next year, grade level of 10, of course. And this is the student. So basically, I'm just going to this individual student screen within PowerScheduler. I do need to make sure from the live side that she is set to schedule. I do want her to have a next grade, a priority, which we do talk about again in the automated scheduler session, so I'm not going to go through that again. And every student would have to have a next school indicator. Again, this is a train environment, so you're seeing a different school name, but that would match the school I'm in. Otherwise, I would not see her here. So you're just seeing a result of data, a kind of a data mix. So if their next school indicator is set to yours, that's why you're seeing them here. So if there's ever, again, a new student who you're not finding in PowerScheduler, go to the live side, find this same screen on the live side for a student, because their scheduling preferences screen exists on the live side, and make sure their next school indicator is set appropriately. That's typically done by somebody in enrollment or registration, but sometimes that is missed. So I did want to point that out. So I'll come over here, and again, I'm pretending I'm working with a new student after my requests are in. And I can go to the request screen tab, I should say. This is a way that I could individually put requests on one student. And the reason I point this out again is in this case where you're working with that one student for whatever reason, maybe some of the examples I just gave. But you're not going to do this for every single student. So I can click on New Request, Associate, and use my Control key, and I can select the 7 or 8 classes that she needs. I'm just picking random classes right now, by the way. I can do that on an individual student. I can submit. And now she has her requests on her that I need. But again, you're not going through 100 or 700, or some of you have 1,000 students, and you're not going to do it that way, understandably. So I do want to show you a second way to get requests on your students. And sometimes some of you will be doing it this way. So I'll go back to the Search Students menu here. And now I'm looking at my whole list of kids, not an individual. And again, I selected a next year grade level of 10. Now, some of our buildings do request courses on their students this way, and you might be doing it right now. You can do a mass request of one course at a time. So in order to do that, you would make your selection, and it doesn't have to be just a grade level. It can be anywhere from 2 kids to all the kids in the building. And you can make it so whatever selection you have. I currently have 400 rising 10th graders. And I can go to the Functions menu. And I can do a mass add request. But from this screen, I can only select one course at a time. So again, not as effective or efficient as setting up online request screens for every student to plug in what they need and want at once, because there's some manual work here. So if this is how I put in all my requests, I could find my English 10 course and submit on them. Then I'd come back to the screen and I'd find my geometry and I would submit on that. So, but every time this page is going to refresh, and every time you're going to have to come back to this page. And let's face it, not every student on this list is going to take the same geometry. And in most of your cases, not every student going into the 10th grade is going to take the exact same English class. So that's why we use request screens, because this becomes quite a cumbersome process, tedious process, if you will, to get all the requests on the different types of students with all the different needs that you have in your building. So that was a real quick overview on individually requesting for one student and then mass requesting for groups of students. Does anybody have any questions on that before I go to the online request screens portion? Okay. I'm just going to go back to the main screen here to get my main menu in PowerScheduler. So I'll click that in the breadcrumbs. Those of you who've been in PowerSchool at least a few years, remember that the menus used to look more like this on the live side. But since that enhanced menu refresh 2 or 3 years ago, it does look a little bit different. But PowerScheduler menus look like the classic menu, as you can see. So again, we're going to talk online request screens. So there's 2 components to this, and I'll kind of bounce between the 2, describing what the differences are and how they work hand in hand, because the setup on both of these are needed. So I am going to start in screen setup though. And before I go in, I want you to know that, again, something I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to restate it. You need a scenario setup. You need to have a course catalog. You need your course catalog to be accurate, again, with the right courses checkboxed. Ideally, before any students make their requests, you'd want any new courses in your catalog that are being added for next year. One of the, I wouldn't say the worst things that's happened to me, but just something frustrating that happened to me in a building that, well, it was my mistake that I did, was I forgot to add a brand new elective that we were excited about and some of the teachers were excited about into these request screens. And guess what happened? No students requested it because they didn't know it existed. So Again, you want to double, triple check your course catalog and eventually your course groups, which we'll get to be sure that anything you need someone, a student, to get a request for by their own choosing or not, must be set up within these course groups to display on the online request screen. And this will make a whole lot more sense once I walk through all this. So I just want to show you what this looks like here. Once I click into request screen setup, you get a list of grade levels. Always remember that the grade level showing on this screen is future grade level. So I am in a high school. I know our middle schools here will see some different grade levels, of course, but I'm seeing the grade levels that are in my building. Now I'm going to ignore 13, 14, 15. I don't have seniors. If I do have seniors that are staying on after their senior year, I'm probably hand scheduling them most likely. So I'm not worried about my 13, 14, 15s or anything like that. So I'm going to go to grade 9 as my example, and I'm going to talk through a few things on the screen, and then I'm going to show you something different in grade 10. On my grade 9 screen setup, note that it says setup for 26-27. That pertains to the fact that I have a scenario and my scheduling year is set up correctly. Again, if you haven't built your scenario, you're probably seeing a different year here, and that's okay. All right, we're just looking at last year's information. My screen probably looks different than almost all of yours right now in that I have gone through and I've deleted all of these requirements down here. You're seeing whatever was there from a prior year. And I'll show you an example of that too. But I did want to start with a blank slate so that one of the things I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm going to walk you through how to build these requirements out. So every one of these requirements requires a course group. You see this column over here, course group. Every requirement or category, as I've become known to call it most recently, I like the word category better than requirement. Every requirement requires that it's tied to a course group. And what that means is, what are the options or the courses that they have to either choose from or have to take within that requirement? That's what that course group's going to tie to. So as promised, I'm going to flip over to grade 10, future grade 10, and I'm going to show you something a little bit different. This is one that's already set up. So this just came over from another district. I didn't set this up myself. It's not exactly how I would set it up, but I wanted to show you just an example that another district is doing. So in this district, the students can take multiple English classes a year, and there is a list, which I'll show you, of English classes available for them to choose from. Okay? Whereas U.S. history for rising sophomores there's only one option. All right, they can only pick, I should say, they can only pick one course. It's a single course requirement, therefore they can only pick one. So they can pick multiple Englishes, they can pick multiple maths, multiple sciences apparently, and then so on and so forth. But for history, they can only pick one of them. And I'm willing to bet there's options such as U.S. history, CCP U.S. history, maybe honors U.S. history, but they can only pick one of them. All right. Any questions about that so far? And I am going to get more into the weeds about these different types of requirements, by the way. But that's kind of my first note about single course requirement versus multi-course requirement. Single means they can pick one. Multi-course means they may be able to pick more than one. Notice I said maybe. Any questions about that so far? Again, I'm going to dig deeper into that. Okay. So I do want to show you what these course groups look like now, but I have found in doing this training a couple of times that to me, it's easier to talk about course groups once you've seen this screen first so that you know what a course group does. So the course group provides the options the kids have to choose from. So for every one of these, there has to be a course group. Now, you may notice at some point in this that you can reuse the course group in different places. I'll give you an example. College Credit Plus. The College Credit Plus in my train environment provides a list of maybe every CCP class that's available to my students. And as we all know that work in high schools or have worked in high schools, or probably even those of you that work in middle schools know that if a student is eligible, they can take a CCP class. Therefore, I can reuse the same College Credit Plus course group on all of my grade levels. So I'm just reusing the same course group because, again, a course group is just a list of courses that students can pick from within that category. Now, they have it set up as a single course requirement. That is a little surprising to me. That means their kids can only pick one course off this list. Each kid can only pick one. So I would personally set this up as a multi-course, but that's just the way they did it. The other example I'll give related is that we allow our students at Meta High School to choose whether they have study hall or not. And in fact, they can choose to have more than one study hall. So we have this course group called All Grade Study Hall. That's just what they called it here. And it's tied to a requirement of study hall. Again, I don't really like that name requirement. I would call it a category myself if I were to choose how to redesign the screen. And this category of study hall, they can probably pick one or two, or they probably don't have to pick one at all if they don't want to. They're not required to. But because they can pick more than one, it's a multi-course requirement. I am going to come back to the subject of new core requirements because I don't have an example on here. But when I build out these requirements in grade 9, I will go through each one of these in great detail. Any questions on anything you've seen on this screen so far? And I will go through the entire screen. Just wanted to talk through course groups so far, mainly here. Not seeing anything in the chat. I'm going to go back to the PowerScheduler main menu. And now I'm going to select course groups. In my train environment, there are a lot of them. You hopefully are not seeing over 50 of them like I am, but you might be. So the way they've built them here is they've built out course groups for each subject area, but then in some cases, they've also built out elective course groups per subject area. Now, the way I scheduled in a building prior to this position I'm in now is I had a grade level / subject for each course group was a grade level / subject, and then I had an electives per grade level as well. Like a 9th grade electives course group has a slightly different list than a 12th grade electives group, right? Because usually my rising seniors will have more options to pick from than 9th grade electives. That's why I don't just have one called electives in general that I can use on every grade level, because it is specific to the grade level, right? Like Spanish 4 is probably in my 12th grade electives, would not be in my 9th, 10th, and maybe even 11th grade electives choices. So I have to that's one way I'm restricting who can pick which courses, is by putting only the right courses into the right course group. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to use my 9th grade as my example, because that's the screen I'm going to be building out in today for you. So I'm going to go to 9th grade English here. And this is kind of an overwhelming list. So something I want to point out here for you is that, in my opinion, I have way too many courses to choose from. So how does one clean that up? So I can show the current catalog only, but if I have all of these courses available to me through my catalog, then that's why I'm seeing so many. What we do recommend on the live side, and again, I told you we're probably not touching the live side much in this training, but every single course is made available per building per school year. But likely there's courses on this list, even in your own that you're seeing, that maybe, and I'm going to use this as examples here, maybe aren't used anymore. All right. We don't have a class called 10th grade students anymore. We used to use it maybe for advisory a couple of years back, but we're not using it anymore. If whomever manages courses for your district or for your building marks those courses as unavailable for the next school year. So again, even if you're still using them this current school year, if you're not using them next year, from the live side, if someone designates those courses as unavailable for the following year, you won't see them here anymore. And in my opinion, I think most would agree, it really makes this screen easier to look at. Algebra is a great example. And you might be seeing the same in your district, hopefully not. There are so many different versions of algebra class that if I'm a new scheduler, if I'm newer to this process, I might not even know which courses we need to offer or give the option of for next year. So it would benefit me as an experienced or a new scheduler if someone that manages courses in my district would clean up this list by making unavailable the courses that we no longer need. And there maybe we do use all these classes. That's a possibility. I'm betting some of these are online options. I see the OL designation. So that probably makes a difference. All right. So currently I'm in the 9th grade English group. So I'm only checking the box for courses that an incoming 9th grader would be able to select from. So I'm going to make this a little bit easier on myself, and I'm going to do a Control F search. Because again, there's so many. I see CCP English, English 1, 2, EL English 1, 2, 3, probably not any of those. English 10s. Here's what I'm looking for. English 9, Honors English 9. Let's see what else we have here. You know what? I did see a composition. So maybe my freshmen can take English composition or composition 2. I'll just say comp 1. Okay. Technically a possibility. I'm not going to include that one. That sounds like an elective to me. And it looks like that's it. So now I think I have 3 options for a freshman to choose from. Anytime I'm making changes on this page, I am going to submit at the bottom. And now that's saved. This menu does reload, so if you have a lot on the list here, you do always have to scroll back down to find your place on where you are working. So again, the less you have over here, the better off you'll be. I'm going to go back in there because I want to talk through a couple of pieces about this up here. So 1, the limit here is 50 characters according to PowerSchool. I have seen issues if the length of this name is longer than 15, believe it or not, which I know sounds odd since it says right on the page limit of 50. This is Core PowerSchool's designation here. But again, in my experience, in past years at least, if this was longer than 15 characters, I have experienced issues with that. So just to give you a heads up, as a rule, I would advise you to keep this as short as possible. And I think it helps look at this menu anyway. So when I do this, I've been just removing anything that's not needed. 9 English tells me exactly what I need to know. It's incoming 9th graders and it's the English department. So that's all I would do. Now, you can call it what you want, but again, I would advise keeping it 15 characters or under. if you're editing the name, or if you're creating a new course group name. All right.
Even there is a question in the chat. It says, is it possible for courses to show up on this screen even if they were unchecked for the upcoming year?
They shouldn't be showing here. If I click current catalog, they should not be showing if they were unchecked for the following year. But if you're seeing, it sounds like you might be seeing something like that. If you want to elaborate, but if not, if you just want us to look at that, okay. Yeah, so one of the buildings here is seeing something like that. So I'll be curious to dig into that. If you can put in a case to the scheduling team, I would like to, that will help us figure out your own issue, but in a lot of these cases, it helps us help other districts as well. So I'll be curious to see what that's about. But my impression has been, if it's made unavailable for the following school year, then it wouldn't appear on this list. But I am seeing, like I said, in this train environment, which is pulled from another district, I am seeing a lot of courses here. I don't normally see this many. So I am kind of curious about that. So I would appreciate if you put in a case and we can look at that for you. The other thing about the course group name I want to point out, and this happens more often than you would expect. I've done it myself, but sometimes as we're typing, I'm just going to say, let's pretend I'm creating a new one here. And I start typing. I say 9 English. And I don't know if you noticed what I did there, but sometimes I have a tendency, and I've noticed others do too, because I've fielded this issue before several times, is I have a tendency as I'm typing to just put an extra space at the end as if I'm going to write something else here, but then I don't. So 9 space English space. I call that in PowerSchool a rogue space. This works the same if I'm creating a new course. So those that create new courses in your district, this happens occasionally. We just start typing, we get into it, and then we want to move on to the next field to fill in, and we put a rogue space, what I call a rogue space on the end of that name. That's gonna cause you an issue. If I save it this way, the behavior I've noticed is that my courses that are in this course group will not show up on the online student request screen because it can't match the course group to the actual name, because the name is technically 9 English space, but the other screen can't recognize that. So double check that. I'm going to back it up. So it's just going to be called 9 English. I also want to point out that if you decide to come through here, like, if you're kind of like me, I just want to, if this was my school, I'd want to come through here and just change all these names to make them to simplify them, and it just make them easier to read. If you do that, I do advise that if you're changing these course group names, I advise you, before you open up your request screens to students, to also go through on your request screens and remove, I'm sorry, not remove. I want you to go through your request screens and make sure that these new names are reflecting on your request screens. Because again, if you rename them here, kind of like the rogue space, they could become detached from those requirements that you've built on the online request screens. It's just kind of a weird issue. I wouldn't even call it a bug in PowerSchool. I think it's just a disconnect issue when it can't find the name of the course group. So again, something I've noticed in the past, may no longer be an issue, but these are just things that we've seen over the years. Any questions about the naming convention of our course groups, or what I'm adding here for my course group? Save that. I want to show you another course group while I'm over here on this screen. Something a little bit different than anything I've described so far. I want you to know that I created this one for the purpose of my example. I'm going to go ahead and match my, just because that's the way I am. I like them to match. So I call this one 9 core. I'm creating a course group right now that are all the courses and only the courses that every incoming freshman has to take in my building. So what I'm basically saying is, and I'm going to scroll down for some examples. Hopefully I don't make anybody dizzy here. Every freshman in my building that comes into my building has to take modern world history. It's required. They don't have a choice. There is no modern world versus honors modern world versus CCP modern world. There's just every freshman gets modern world. All right. Additionally, every freshman gets scheduled into PE by default. I know that's not the way most high schools do it anymore, but just for the purposes of our example, so bear with me. So every freshman's going to get a PE class. And then probably later, when I find out who my waiver students are in the marching band or who play athletics, I can remove that request off of those individuals. But by default, I'm going to get every student incoming freshman a PE class. Sure, I missed one here. I thought I had a couple more, but modern world. Okay, maybe not. So I can also add things like health, advisory, lunch. Let's see if there's a lunch course on here. There we are. Lunch. And a lot of health classes. Find maybe one that looks like, there it is. Health class. Okay. I'm saving that so that I can show you that example once we get to the online request screens. So again, this is a group of courses. Students don't have to choose between or choose among. They're getting all those courses. I've called it 9 core for a reason. Every freshman has to take them, right? So this is a different way to use these course groups. And this is another selling point for why to use the online request screens versus doing that mass add or individually on a student. Because again, if there's anything that I need to quote mass add to a group of students, especially, I guess this works by grade level in this case. So if it's by grade level, I can just automate it. All right. So I'm gonna automate every freshman to get those 4 courses I just added to this group. So I've saved that. And does anyone have questions about these course groups? No? If not, oh, I do see a question in the chat. Can these be used for electives? Yes, that's a great example. I'm glad that question came up because I can show you that. 9th grade electives. Again, I could change the name of this if I want. Don't need to. Every course they have to choose from for a 9th grade elective is checkboxed. Aerospace leadership, intro to engineering, intro to health science, animation classes, computer science, marketing. So a lot of options. There might be 30, there might be 100. You're a smaller building. I don't know. Maybe there's only 10 for a middle school, for example. So everything that a freshman could possibly choose out of the electives is checkboxed here. So very different from a core group. An electives group is optional, what the kid can choose from. Whereas core, I'm going to designate that on the request screens as every kid's getting it. And I'll show you how when I get there. Did that answer the question in the chat? Can these be used for electives? Great. Okay. So let's go back to PowerScheduler, main menu, and screen setup. So now I'm gonna walk you through using the grade 9 as an example, what all of these pieces of this screen mean And then we're going to go through building out these requirements, or as I like to call them, categories. So firstly, I recommend that all of you, if you're in your own environment, there's no harm in checking this box right here. What this does is it makes the online student request screen available in the admin portal only. So only administrators and admin assistants or secretaries, counselors, anyone who has an admin portal account for PowerSchool could see the request screen on an individual student if this is checked. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not quite ready for that yet. But you don't have to check this. But all I'm saying is there's really no harm in doing so, because the worst that's going to happen is an admin user will stumble upon that student page and wonder, what is this? So, but maybe it'll be a good idea for them to see that. So again, no harm in checkboxing this. Only your admin users are going to see the request screen if I check that box. Now, in my case, they will see basically nothing because nothing's been built yet. So up to you. Completely opposite. I don't want you to check this box until you are ready for students and parents to see the screen, the request screen in the public portal. So student and parent portal, public portal, whatever you want to call it. Don't check this box until you are ready to go live, as I put it. All right. When you're making that announcement, the portal is open. Students can make their requests. That's when you check this box. This is the last thing you do, just about the last thing you do before students can get in and make their requests. I also want to point out that note that this is grade level specific. So my rising grade 9s are obviously my current 8th graders over at the middle school. And that's important because the kids in the middle school, since they're pointed toward the high school for next year, they're requesting out of the high school, meta high school. All right. So even if your middle school counselors and other staff are helping their 8th graders request for next year in the spring, they're requesting out of the high school building, which means what they see is determined completely by the high school. All right. So again, student and parent portal will turn it on for the students and parents. The admin portal will only turn the screen on for your admin users. And you don't ever have to worry about this third checkbox here. Let's move on to the message. So I did add something to this earlier, and I want to talk through this. This message is optional. It can be anything that you want it to say. It can be as short as you want. I've seen something as simple as welcome freshmen, make your selection, keep it short, keep it sweet if you want. I added a few things here just so I could walk through some examples of maybe messages I would want to include here, like directions. All right. We all know that these directions are only as good as the people who read them. So I can put all I want in here, but if my students and parents aren't going to read them, they're not very helpful. But if you would like to put some directions in here, I think it couldn't hurt. So that's what I recommend. All right, so I said, welcome new freshmen. Please complete the course request for next year. Also, and we'll talk through this, select 1 or 2 alternate electives that you would take if a preferred course is unavailable or full. All right, so again, I'm just giving them more information up here. Completely optional. You could leave this completely blank if you prefer. Another thing I put in here, just to give you another example of something kind of neat you can do with this, is that you can include HTML code links. And so I'm going to copy paste this into the chat because we get this question ever so often. Not a lot, but sometimes. And I obviously used Google. I just picked the most generic website possible for this. But if you use the same sentence, or at least the same code that I just pasted into our chat, then you could replace this text with whatever you want it to say, and replace this text with whichever website you want it to go to. And it's a way that a lot of our buildings now are linking their course description guide. So I know most of us aren't printing 100-page course description guides anymore like we used to. Some of us still are, but if you're not doing that anymore and you do have an online course description guide or just really any website, typically something within your school or district website, you'd be linking here. If you want to link them anywhere for something to reference, this would be the way to do it. All right, and this is just basic HTML code. Note that this is on the end of whatever text that you want linked. So when I get to the part where I show you the preview, I'll show you exactly what that looks like if you're curious. It's basically hyperlinking that text and taking you to this website. But we had someone ask this a few years ago, and I thought, yeah, that's a pretty good idea to be able to plug in a website for my course description guide. So wish I had thought about that when I was in a district. Next up is credit hours. Now, before our middle school staff members on the call tune out, I want you to know that I'm not talking about earned credit hours here for a high school transcript. What PowerScheduler calls credit hours is screen credits. All right, so I want you to think of, and it really should say this, again, if I could redesign the screen, I would say screen credits or screen credit hours. So I want you to think about this as places in a student schedule or amount of time that a student has available in their schedule. How many spaces do they have in a schedule? And you can kind of see from my, my auto fix here, that I plugged in a 4 and a 9 here for an example. I could do this. I could plug in any numbers here. But what I want to warn you is this could restrict what kids, I'll say how many classes a kid can select versus how many can't, and it could backfire on you. So I will say most of our buildings aren't using these numbers. So screen credits, think of it this way. One screen credit is equivalent to a full year class. Again, forget earned credits on a transcript. It's not what it's talking about. But usually it may be equal to that, right? If I take Spanish 1 for a year, I do get a full credit. A full year class is worth a full screen credit in the eyes of PowerScheduler. Again, this is think of it in terms of blocks of time in a student schedule that's available. So it's just a way of calculating how many spots or blocks of time a student has available in their schedule. So a half of a screen credit is a semester-long class, and a full screen credit is a year-long. So just think of it that way, not necessarily equal to earned credits. And I'm gonna divert a little bit back to another place in PowerScheduler just to illustrate what I'm talking about here, what I'm referring to. Back on the PowerScheduler menu, when I go to my courses menu, this is a way to see the preferences on any course. And I'm going to pick a more typical course, so Algebra 1. When I go to any course, note that it has 2 fields listed on the preferences. One I can change and one I cannot change. I cannot change the amount of earned credit potentially that a student can earn from here, right? Because that's a live side thing. I'm not changing live side data. What I could change, and I wouldn't want to in this case, is how much screen credit it's worth. So again, maybe different, maybe the same. The way I've just described this, there are exceptions, just like to every rule, there are exceptions to the basic example I've given you. But until you've decided to use request screens, unless anyone has questions, I think I'm just going to hold off there because, again, most of us are not using these numbers. And you might be looking at your screen and say, well, we are. Well, we have some plugged in there. If they're working for you, great. But you could leave them blank and not even worry about it. But if you leave them blank, you might be thinking, well, how do I restrict the amount of classes that a student could pick? And that's a valid question. But I'm going to show you once we start building out these requirements in a few minutes here, that when I build these out, I'm going to predetermine within each of the requirements or categories how many they can pick or how many they can't pick. So in my opinion, usually I can take care of the minimum and maximum within this list of requirements. But this is kind of a safety net for that to make sure that they're not picking more classes than they have spots for, if you will. Questions on that? Okay. Let's talk through the different types of requirements now. I gave you a real quick overview of each of these, but I'm going to dig in more in a moment. Where I really want to start on this piece, though, is right here. New core requirement is where I always like to start. It seems to make the most sense to me to go from here, then here, then here. So new core requirement. This is a way to create a category or requirement tied to a course group that every student has to have in their schedule. That's why I called it Core 9 for my core course group. So I'm going to click into here. Anytime you want to create a new one, click into here. Now I have very limited options to fill in here. I can call this requirement whatever I want the kids to see, kids and parents, I should say. So the students and parents are never going to see the name of my course group. They're going to see the name of this requirement. In my opinion, I don't have to put a grade level on here, right? Because that's a given. Only rising grade 9 kids are going to see this. Therefore, I can skip the grade level and I'm going to keep it real simple. Required, or let's say required courses. So only courses that are required are going to be within this course group. And now I pick a course group for it, 9 core. Excuse me. So because I built a core requirement tied to this course group, every kid who submits requests that's going into the 9th grade will get all the courses in this group. Description, again, optional. Use it for instructions if you'd like. You don't have to, but I would probably give some sort of indication of what this means. I think that's helpful, useful to the students and parents. Every student, oops, just a letter there. Every freshman takes these courses or are required to take these courses. If I could type. There we go. Excuse me. All right, so title, simple description, course group. It will not let me submit without a course group, by the way. And then number of requests to generate per course. So we get a lot of questions on this. I want to clarify some things. So almost always, almost for every single one of you, the answer is going to be 1. The answer might be 2. It will rarely be more than that. And this causes a little bit of confusion. This really does mean a number of the courses within this group to generate. So if I said 2, it would request everything in this group twice, believe it or not. And you might be wondering why, and I'll give you an example. But that means lunch would be requested twice. I think I put an advisory, a world history, a health, a PE. So obviously, in my example, I don't need all those courses requested twice. I only need them once. However, if you schedule by semester, in other words, and we have plenty of high schools that do this, if you schedule by semester and everybody takes the same course twice, but for half credits, all right? Or in middle school, it could just be the same course twice, not for credit, right? English 7 as an example. I schedule every kid gets an English 7 half a year in the fall, and every kid gets an English 7 half a year in the spring. Therefore, in that case, they would need 2 of each. Again, it's going to be rare they're going to need any more than 2. I I haven't come up with an example in my brain why you need more than two. I'm sure there is one. And that's why it exists. But the way I schedule is every kid gets one request out of the category for each of those courses. But there is, again, a reason why you might do two. Lunch is probably the most obvious example. I'll use a high school in this example here. So I might have a course group. I might just call it lunch. A core course group, by the way, for required lunch. Every kid gets a request for two lunches. And now when they load into courses, they might have a different period lunch in first semester than they do in second. And that's why they need two different semesterized lunch course requests. So that would be the most common use for that. But again, going back to some of our high schools really do have, every kid gets two Englishes, two maths, two science, two social studies, two of all the year longs because they have semesterized courses, high school or middle school. Any questions about that number of requests to generate? That's probably the longest I've ever talked about that, but we do get enough questions where I thought it was a time to address it. Okay, and the most simple thing on this page, I think, is sort order. This is just the order in which you want it to appear on the student request menu. So I could give this a 1, I could give it a 9, whatever number I want to give it. The only really thing that matters is the lower the number, the closer to the top it's going to be at the list. So therefore, I'm going to give it a 10, and I'll show you why. Kind of just the way I like to operate. So my 10 is what I'm going to call the first in order. And then when I build my English in a moment, I'm just going to call it a 20. And my math, I'm going to call it a 30. Next, I'm going to call it a 40. And that way, when I'm working on the screen, I decide that I need another new category, I can kind of fit one in the middle of two others if I need to. You know what I mean? Like I could call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then I'd have to adjust everything down if I decide to fit one up top here. So that's just why I put a 0 on the end. So I can use increments of 10. I can use single digits if I want. Any questions about the core requirements so far? This might be a good time to just show you what my preview student request screen looks like. Even though I'm not done, I think I want at this point everyone to see how this is going to look to a student now, because the next ones I do are going to look a little different. All right. So I'm going to go to preview student request screen. The only requirement I've built is this core one. I'll just point out a few things while I'm here. Because I'm set to the correct scheduling year, they're seeing the correct year. And I point that out because sometimes we'll get a case from a user and they'll say, hey, they're seeing the old year. What's going on? Probably the reason is that you don't have your set scheduling year correct in PowerScheduler, which is part of the automated scheduler setup process. All right, I'm not going to read through this whole thing again, but again, this is the description or instructions that I plugged in. So that's what I chose it to say. You don't have to use that, but you can. And this is how the HTML code will play out. So notice it doesn't show any of that code that was in the brackets, but it does show the title the way I plugged it in. And when I click there, it takes me to, we're pretending this is the course description guide. Oh. All right. But what I also want to show you here is, because it's a core requirement that I built, these courses are automatically selected. I cannot deselect them. Here's the edit button. Each of these has an edit button on it. Here's the edit button. I cannot deselect them. I'm clicking them. It's not doing anything. They're selected for me because I'm going into my freshman year. Everyone takes all of these courses. And then as you can see, and it says it here too, my instructions were every freshman are required to take these courses. I think my grammar's a little off there, but that's okay. So I can click OK or I can click cancel. It doesn't matter. This is just going to, it's not going to change anything. I have a green checkbox because that is technically a completed requirement on this page. All right. Anything that where I've met the requirements, it's going to show a green check mark. Anything where I haven't met the requirement, and I'll show you this in a bit, I'm going to get a red, kind of a red one here, red X, I think it is. While I'm here, I'll also point out that if you've mass requested or individually requested courses on a student the way I showed you earlier, they're going to appear here on your example student. This screen here is just pulling a random student for me. So, but if you're on an actual student page, so when a student logs in here, starts making his or her requests, just know that these additional requests is going to show anything that you've manually added onto that student, which some of our districts do that. And then lastly, for now on this page, I just want to show you these screen credits. It does show down here. This number is pulling right from those preferences I showed you earlier. So Modern World's a full year worth of credit. Health is a half a year worth of half. Technically, I would have built this PE as a half of a screen credit so that it took up a half of a year spot. That's how I would do it. And then lunch, the way I schedule doesn't technically take up, quote unquote, a spot in the schedule. So I don't have any screen credit on that course. But this is pulling that calculation right here. It's just adding up these numbers here. Questions so far on this, the registration preview? Okay. All right, I'm back here now. I am going to go through building a couple of these single course requirements and a couple multi-course requirements for you, because they do appear differently and they have some different menu items than your core requirement. So we know what a core requirement is now. Moving on to single course requirement. So we need an English requirement, right? Or a category, if you will. So again, I don't need to call out ninth grade. They know they're going into ninth grade. Those are the only kids who are seeing this screen. I could keep it real simple. I don't have to put anything at all. Every student must select an English class. All right, that may be obvious, but you can put in whatever you want there. List of courses. And I showed you the course group earlier for English. So 9 English is my list of courses. We should see 3 options to choose from. Because it's a single course requirement, every kid coming in the 9th grade can only pick one of them. Now, if you offer, if we're talking about a grade level who take, I'm going to call it semesterized courses, and CCP is my best example of this. If there's like a Comp 1 and Comp 2 option, then you would need to build this as a multi-course requirement. Where it gets tricky is that if I'm using my freshmen as the example, majority of my freshmen are not taking CCP Comp 1 and CCP Comp 2, but there might be someone in the grade level doing that. There might be several of them doing that. So again, I'd have to build this as a multi-course, and I would somehow have to restrict who can pick the CCP course, because I don't want just any freshman that maybe hasn't met the requirement, especially picking the CCP comp course. Same goes for honors, in fact. I would like a way to restrict who can pick the honors, maybe. And we have we serve different school districts with different philosophies on this. So your district may say, hey, kid wants to take honors, they can select honors. And other districts say the opposite. A student has to be recommended to pick honors. So we will come back to that. All right, there is a way to restrict individually, student by student, who can select which courses. But in general, they're all going to see the same options, and the options are whatever you've designated in that course group. All right, so 9 English is the group. This is a different option than you saw in the core requirement because, again, core requirement is required. This one may or may not be. Why would you have a single course, quote, requirement that they could leave blank? Well, I can think of a few reasons, but I just want to say you probably wouldn't ever use that on English because I think every freshman's going to have an English class. So I'll say must select one. I will use an example here of, you know what, I'll give it right now. The example that I'm thinking of where maybe it would be blank. So foreign language comes to mind. A student is, any student who takes a foreign language class in high school is probably going to take one at a time. Maybe there's exceptions, but most of them would only take one at a time. And you may have a foreign language category. You may have all your French and Spanish and German classes in the category for foreign language. And you could set it to can leave blank. That way the kid can request one, but they don't have to. Any questions about this setting? I've rarely used this, and this was on the last one, or no, this wouldn't have been on the last one that I showed you, but message to display if students are required to select, but they leave it blank. Again, you can leave it blank for a generic message. I just let the generic message do its job. Basically, it's not going to let them submit their course requests if they haven't met the requirement anyway. All right. Another new one here on this page, request type. I need to tell you the difference between these different request types. So almost always required is the answer. All right. Even if, again, PowerScheduler is using the word requirement and maybe required a little bit loosely here. Obviously, in the case of English, that is required. But the differences between these are required is anything that, if selected, should appear on their schedule and not be replaced by anything. Okay? Should be on their schedule and should not be replaced by anything. Therein lies the difference. Let me wait until I talk about actual electives before I tell you what these are. Okay? But I'm going to say that unless we're talking electives, consider it required. Again, even if the answer was can leave blank, still, if they select something, consider it required. Required as in required for the load. You want the loader to try to load that course for the student. Okay? And I'll talk about there too momentarily. Request to generate, again, I'm going to say 1, depending on how you schedule. That's the answer a lot of the time. And I told you earlier, I'm just going to use increments of 10. So for the purposes of my example, I'm going to go through this a lot quicker. I'm going to say math. I'm going to say 9th grade math. They must select one. Request type is required. That's a 30. I would do the same thing with my science. Maybe they have physical science or biology to choose from. To be honest, I didn't look at that course group, but I'm going to bet that that's the case. That is also required. That's the next one. I do want to point out that if you wanted to change these numbers, it's very easy to do. So if I wanted to shift everything down, I could, could easily do any change I make to this page, whether it be these checkboxes, anything in this field, anything in these fields, or anything in these fields, I have to submit to keep those changes. I've made that mistake before myself. And you know what? I'm not going to do that last one because I included world history in the required courses, if you remember. Therefore, I don't need a social studies requirement or category. So now I want to move on to multi-course requirement. And it is what you think it is by this point, I'm sure. A multi-course requirement is where students have the option to pick more than one course within the category. All right. Single course, they could only pick one. Multi-course, they may be able to pick more than one. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's use that as our next example. Electives. Here's where I think would be really helpful to put some instructions. You're going to determine what the minimum and maximum that they can pick from is, but you might want to describe it or have them pick. Choose your primary electives. You might even say choose 2 or 3 primary electives. All right, so we'll leave it at that to keep it simple. Just like the others, your course group, pick one, and this is going to be electives. And I showed you this course group earlier because I had a good question in the chat. So this electives group is tied to all of those courses that a freshman could possibly pick from. So in my example here, and your number may vary, they have to pick at least 2 off the list. And they can pick a max of 3, no more than 3. This is the way to set it real specifically here. All right, message to display if the number of courses selected is not correct. Again, I'm going to rely on that generic message. All right, here's where the request type might be a different answer, might be. If you say required here, it does not mean that they have to get all the courses that they pick, but it does mean a difference in the load process. So if you remember from our other training, the load process is what puts students into course sections based upon their requests. Required to the load process means put them in this class, however, wherever you can. There still may be conflicts. They may not get it. They may get it. They may not. The difference here is if I select elective, that means an alternate request could replace an elective. If I use alternates, you might not use alternates. And notice that alternates will be used if elective cannot be filled. If you're not using if you're not using alternate requests, then every answer is required because it doesn't matter. The load process, you're using the load process to put students in as many requests as you can get them into. But if you do use alternates, then any of these categories that you set to elective request type can be replaced with an alternate. Now that's important because I wouldn't want my math or English class to be replaced by an alternate. And I might not want something like band or choir to be replaced by an alternate. And I probably don't want Spanish to be replaced by an alternate. But there's maybe another list of electives that could be replaced by an alternate. So therefore, by picking elective request type here, anything the kids pick out of this category may be replaced by an alternate if it can't find a spot for that primary. And that's why I use the word primary up here. That's the language I chose. You might choose a different language. Number of requests to generate, still 1. I'm going to call that 60 just to keep in line with the others. Do I have any questions about the request type so far? I'm gonna show you an example of using an alternate, and it might make a little more sense after that. But does anybody have any initial questions about that? Okay. So now I have my electives, and I'm going to do 1 more of these. New multi-course requirement. Actually, I'll do 2 more, and I'll show you why. I'll call this alternate elective requests. Again, I can call this whatever I want, whatever makes it the most clear. Please choose, this is again where I think that the instructions are very helpful, 1 or 2 alternates in case you cannot get into your primary elective request. Please select, again, these instructions are only as good as the people who read them. Sometimes people read them, sometimes they don't. Please select different courses. Some people don't like to use the caps. That's a habit of mine. Please select different courses than you selected in your primary elective requests. This is probably more wordy than I need to be, but I'm trying to be very specific here. List of valid courses. I want to show you what I'm going to do here. This may or may not surprise you. I'm going to use the exact same course group. What this very well could result in, all right, I do have students who love to take art class, and that's fair. What those students might do is select art in both categories. I really want art, so I'm going to select it in my primary. I'm going to select it in my alternate. I don't really want to take anything else. I just want to take art. Well, unfortunately for that student, that's not real helpful in this load process because it's just not, the load process isn't going to do any, that selecting the same alternate as the primary they selected isn't going to do anything helpful for their schedule. So the idea here is that they would select different ones. What I've seen a couple of buildings do, this is completely up to you, is you could make a separate course group called alternate electives, and you could remove those maybe most commonly requested elective courses, like I'm gonna say it, band, choir, art 1. All right. Maybe those are the courses that usually if a kid picks them, it's not an alternate, it's just, that's what they're getting into. You could have an alternate elective course group. In that way, it might narrow out some of that for you. But most of our buildings that are using alternates would just use the same electives group. I'm going to say they have to pick one alternate. They can pick a max of 2. Again, these numbers can be set however you want them to be. But this way, it's going to give me some backup options. And even if the load process doesn't do a super great job, because it might not be perfect, you're not going to get nobody's getting a perfect load. At least you'll have these listed on that student and on your reports to say, oh, so-and-so did not get an 8th period class, and I'm kind of filling gaps in schedules, but I see that they said computer tech was an alternate. Well, if I move his biology, I can slide him into this computer tech class. So it's nice to have. It's good information to have, in my opinion, and it doesn't hurt, in my opinion. Again, going with the generic message. This is where I'm going to set request type to alternate, because anything they pick out of this bucket here is an alternate, which means it's not a it's secondary, so to speak. So the load process will try to load their primary required requests first and their electives. Then it'll try to replace alternates with electives when and if needed. So that's how these request types work. It makes this group secondary. Questions on alternate request types versus elective request types? All right. The last one I'm going to do real quickly, just as another example, because we saw this earlier, is some kids, CCP option, even kids as young as middle school are taking CCP, as we all know. So, you might just have a category in general that's tied to College Credit Plus. In fact, you might just have a holding course called CCP or College Credit Plus. And this may be the way that you're letting them indicate that they're interested. So I know that CCP intent forms aren't due. I think it's either April 1st or May 1st, somewhere in that time frame. But maybe you're doing these requests in January or February. but you want kids to be able to indicate if they're interested in CCP. Actually 0. So what this means is they don't have to, kind of like that single course request where they could leave blank. This is the same way of doing it in a multi-course request. They could leave it blank. They can pick up to 1, or maybe they can pick up to 3. But again, it's a way for them to indicate maybe to you that they're taking CCP at all, or maybe you actually have those courses listed in the group, the ones that they can actually choose from. Just depends on how you're doing it. It's a couple. I'm giving you a couple of different examples of ways you might use this. This here. Please indicate whether you're taking CCP classes next year, or whether you're interested in taking. Okay. And this is up to you. Again, required means it's going to be primary in the load process. Elective means it can be replaced by an alternate course request. So that's up to you. It's all that means. So required is a little bit of a misleading term here, but just, however you want to handle that. Just wanted to walk through that example with you. So let's go back to the preview registration screen. We'll wrap this part of the session up in a few here. I just want to show you that what this is going to look like now that all, if not the majority, of my requirements or categories are built out. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, let's see here. Okay, I must have set this to you can leave as blank because I'm surprised it's giving me that green checkbox. I would have thought that it's going to have that exclamation point to say that I have not fulfilled that yet. So we better check on that. Required courses, we've already talked that through. Can't change them. It's core requirement. English, presumably I have to select one. That's the way I would hope. While we're here, I also want to point out a couple of other pieces that haven't come up yet. One, you can have a course description listed here. As you can see, some of our districts are using very long, and if this was in a course program handbook, this doesn't look like a very long one, but just know that when you're putting them in here, this is how it's going to look. So it could make this page or this selection box very long, but you can have course descriptions in here. A note about course descriptions. So in general, the course description pulls from the course preferences on the live side. However, since we've encouraged you to reuse former year's course catalogs, it's looking at the course catalog that you used last year, which is including the course description you had last year. So the only way to get, let's say that your team decided to go through and update all the course descriptions on the live side, those would not pull over here, because what this does is when your course catalog is created, whether it was created this year or 3 years ago, the one that you're using right now, it pulled the course descriptions from the live side in that moment. And that's why if you went and changed your English 9 course description, or you plugged one in right now on the live side, it would not show here. You would need to plug it in on the current course catalog within PowerScheduler as well. So a little bit of I guess, bad news if you wanted to update all your course descriptions. They would need updated within the catalog. Prerequisite. This is pulling from the course, and this is called a prerequisite note. So note that I can select whichever, I'm a student, and I can select whichever course I want. I'm not restricted to do so. Therefore, either I've met the prerequisites, or there's no prerequisite rule set on this course. You can have a note without a rule. A note is informational, a rule is strict. Those prerequisites, and I am going to show you this before we finish up today, the prerequisites are set on the courses on the live side. And while those in the room that we're speaking to today may not be the same people, the same staff that update courses on the live side. Make sure you're communicating if you want prerequisites, if your team decides to have prerequisites or even prerequisite notes, that needs to be communicated to whomever manages courses on the live side, because that's where that's entered. And again, I will show you that where that's done today. So again, just to clarify one more time, the difference between prereq notes and prereq rules. A note is just informational. If I put a rule on here, students who don't meet whatever that rule says cannot select this. This will be blank. There will be no checkbox here for those students. So that could be helpful if you're the type of district who does need to restrict who can pick what. And again, I think a good example I mentioned earlier is that, most freshmen aren't taking CCP composition. That there's probably a select group of students that are eligible to do CCP English in the 9th grade, and you may want to restrict who can pick that. And so you might set a prerequisite rule, and there's a few different types of rules you can set on that, but that would be blank for the students who can't select it. Again, some of our districts aren't doing any prereq rules, and anything available to any freshman is available to all freshmen. So however you want to handle that. Questions on prereq notes versus prereq rules so far? All right. An alert will show if either a student has not met the requirement or if they've been recommended by a teacher, which we will address before we finish today. Teacher recommendations. So teacher recommendations is a way for your teachers to log into PowerTeacher Pro and designate whether a student is ready to take on a certain course or not. And obviously the first place that our minds go when we think of that is, oh, whether a student's ready to take honors English or not honors, or CCP English or regular English. And that is a great example, but it could also be used for foreign language. Like I have 180 kids who take Spanish 1, but 10 of them have failed for the first half of the year. And I want to, and if it's, again, this is a district policy, if it's within our district policy to recommend those who are passing and not recommend those who are not, that teacher could, put a recommendation en masse on 180 kids, send that through, and not recommend their 10 for Spanish 2. And then when those kids come to the foreign language, they'll see no checkbox, no ability to select that. And for the kids who did get recommended, it'll say, recommended by Mr. Parpart for Spanish 2. All right, again, I'm using a different subject example than I'm actually on right now, but I just wanted to point out, art is another one I've seen used. So some districts have restricted, if a student failed Art 1, is failing, and that student is currently sitting in Art 1, then that teacher may just put recommendations for everybody who's eligible for Art 2, or like an advanced art class, AP art maybe. Some students aren't going to be eligible to take those classes. So I even know schools with like an honors choir, or like a show choir that you have to audition to get into, I should say. And so that might be another place where the teacher puts the recommendation on some students, but not others. Oh, I should have selected one. So got the green check mark. I select 1 math, got the green check mark, and 1 science. So again, prereq note, but no rule that's keeping me from selecting it. Electives, a little bit different. So my note is up top here. And it's very small, so a lot of people miss it. Choose 2 or 3 primary electives. But then by default, PowerSchool has this built in anyway. So I didn't really need that specific note. I could have put something else there. But it will tell you, because I set between 2 and 3 as the requirement, every student has to pick between 2 or 3. So because I picked 2, I've met the requirement. Alternates similarly. So again, the description's here. It's also up here. And it said that I had to pick 1 or 2 alternate electives. And it says it down here as well. Now I've met that requirement. Note that my CCP option already has a checkbox because when I set that one up, I said they could pick minimum of 0. So they didn't have to pick anything. And this is, again, the reason I brought this up earlier, this is an example of a school who simply uses this category for students to indicate whether they're interested. And then that counselor will pull a list using the request report of every student who indicated CCP interest and invite them to that meeting. So I'm indicating my CCP interest. Once I have all green checkboxes, I'll have a submit button down here. Since this is a sample student screen, I don't have that. Questions on this page here. This is exactly what a student or parent would see in the public portal once turned on. No questions there? So I've shown you the request screen setup, building different types of requirements, core required, single course, multi-course. A little bit of notes on, instructions. We've looked at the preview screen. We've talked through what these 2 checkboxes do. Again, this will show any admin user on the live side per student, that request screen. So now, if I went to the live side and I was on an 8th grader, because again, I'm looking at future 9th, I would see this screen populate for request screens. And that's important because some of our buildings, the counselor will meet with every one of their students or most of their students individually, and they might go through this with them. So if I'm a counselor in a building, because this is checkbox, but this one isn't, the students and parents can't access it through the public portal, but as the counselor, I can, and a student can come to my office and we could go through it together. And again, they and the counselor will both see it this way here, and exactly as it looks here. Close those out. All right. So a couple of things. I want to talk through prerequisites just a little bit more. And again, I know that the people in the room that I'm talking to today may or may not manage courses on the live side, but if you do, this is important. And even if you don't, this is important for you to know. So whomever manages courses, if you are using prerequisite rules or notes, that's done on the live side. So I'm going to pop over to the live side as promised. And I'm going to go to my courses menu. So this English class here that I have pulled up, so I've already pre-searched this out, and it saves my settings here. I'm going to go into this course. This is the screen if you've ever managed courses or just looked at courses that you may be most familiar with. Just the preferences, it's all the settings on the course, right? But I can go to prerequisites tab up here. And you may or may not have seen this before, though. So here's where the note comes from. Again, you can have a note and no rule, and that's allowed. So there's a lot of districts who have that philosophy as well. Technically, anyone could request it in the request screens, but we do have a note to indicate who should be requesting it. But prerequisite rules are created down here. I click the plus button and rule type. The most common prerequisite rule is recommend. This recommend equals teacher recommendation. Teacher recommendation is the number one, I'll say easiest, most effective way to restrict or allow students to pick a course. So some of our buildings are using teacher recommendations on all academics. That's rare. If we have buildings using teacher recommendations, usually it's for like an honors course or CCP or AP or something like that. Or in the case like I gave in art or show choir, maybe something that requires an audition or some kind of performance to earn your way into that course, right? So if I click recommend, I do have an option to put a department on here. What this would mean, if I did, is that only teachers in the English department can make a recommendation for this class. Now that makes sense because I don't need my math teachers or my art teachers recommending for English. And would they? Probably not. But could they by accident? Yeah, they could, and I've seen it. So this is a way to restrict who can recommend. But I do want to warn you, we don't typically recommend plugging in a department here. And here's the reason. The department of the teacher has to match the department of the course, which it probably does in this case. That'd be a pretty easy one. But what if you have a teacher who teaches English and history, and that specific teacher is designated to the history department, not the English department? Now she can't recommend this course because she's technically a history department teacher. And teachers can only be assigned to one department. So if all of your teachers are only assigned to one department, or at least the ones you need to recommend are, then you could use departments on the recommendations. So again, I would plug in English, and I would say add, obtained a teacher recommendation from English department. So specifically an English teacher department teacher has to recommend in order for the kid to select that course. And again, if I don't use a department, simply any teacher who recommends for that course, who recommends a student, the student can get in now or select that course. So that's a prerequisite rule. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to go back to PowerScheduler in my other tab here. Screen setup, grade 9, student preview. Note that I don't have a checkbox anymore. Prerequisites have not been met. So that's what the student's going to get if they don't have the prerequisite met. And the teacher recommendation is the only one I've told you about so far. There are others, but it is the most commonly used and the one we would encourage you to use most. All right, but I can't select that course because I don't have the recommendation. Just wanted to point that out. All right. So what other type of prereqs exist? There are several, but you want to be careful on these other ones. So there are some, I'll call them caveats to these other ones. Concurrent request means that they have to select the other course in order to select that course. This is not a good example for that, obviously. But maybe there's, a pre-engineering and computer tech course that if a student requests engineering, they would also have to simultaneously be requesting computer tech, something like that. Or if you do have your classes split in half by semester, Spanish 2A and Spanish 2B, maybe if they select 2B, they would have to select 2A concurrently. I rarely see this one used, I will say. And when it was used a few years ago, I saw some issues with it. So I can't highly encourage anyone to use this one, I'll be honest. Others, and you're going to kind of you're going to hear a similar pattern here from here on out with these. You can use credit hours such as a student would have had to earn a certain amount of credit in a certain course number in order to request this course. So note that that has to exist in stored grades if you're using this here, or they would have had to earn a credit. And I'm going to give you an example. Let's say in order to take AP English, a student would have had to complete English 11 or earn credit in English 11. Well, presumably, if they're an 11th grader, they have not completed English 11 yet. Therefore, in that case, this one wouldn't work. Now, you could presume completion, but again, I've seen some hiccups with the process here. So in my opinion, take this for what it is, but it's my opinion that if you're going to do something like that, I would instead recommend that you use a teacher recommendation. The teacher can select any students who they know has met the requirement. Now, with that in mind, in order for a teacher to recommend a student, they have to currently teach that student. So that is, a piece to this that is, important. Similarly, with letter grade, percent grade, and average percent grade, I'll use letter grade as just the one example of the three. Again, they had within that course number, they would have to have a certain letter grade in any of these store codes. Now, I have seen, we're past Q1. By the time they request, you might be at the end of Q2. You could do something like Q1, Q2. They had to have like a passing grade. All right. You could do that. But again, in my opinion, I would definitely encourage you to use teacher recommendations instead of these, just because I've seen some hiccups. Any questions on prereqs? All right. The last thing I'm going to talk through here is how your teachers put in teacher recommendations. We do have this great step sheet. This here is meant for your teachers, except for this note here, I will admit. This note in yellow is for the admin users, it's for the schedulers. Everything else on this doc found in our documentation is explaining to a teacher how to use their PowerTeacher Pro account, not the gradebook, and make recommendations. So it gives screenshots, it gives step-by-step how to do this. There are two different ways to make recommendations. One is the teacher can select their whole class. So I know that's, I'll make that a little bigger for you. Let's do everybody a favor here, especially those of us with bad eyes. So this is what they'll see within PowerTeacher Pro. They can click on a class that they teach. So for example, they want to see every kid in their English survey classes. So they select both of the English survey classes. It lists every single kid in both, and they want to recommend them all for Honors English 10. They can do that. With that, they could select the all button and then deselect the kids that are not recommended for that course. All right. Oppositely, they could pull up these lists and just simply select the few kids that are recommended. And then next, they're selecting which course they're recommending right down here. This is something we came across last year at one of our buildings, and I believe it had to do again with that set schedule year. When you instruct your teachers to make their recommendations, have them be sure the recommendation date is next school year. So we're talking currently in December 2025, we are talking about the 26-27 school year. We did have at least one building. You can see these screenshots are pretty old here. We did have a building that had it set to the current year, 25-26. So those recommendations will not work. Another thing I want to point out here is that once your teachers have made their recommendations, they can't be mass deleted. They can be recommended in mass. So again, I just walked you through their grabbing a group of students and recommending them all for a particular class. They can't be deleted in mass. They can be made in mass. And that's important because if you did have a teacher who accidentally selected every single one of his 180 students and said, they can all go to honors next year. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. They really would have to come to this screen and individually edit and delete the recommendations for the kids they didn't mean to recommend. So, good warning for your teachers. All right, so again, the teacher recommendation is our most commonly used prerequisite if you wanted to use a prerequisite rule. You don't have to have a prerequisite rule for teachers to recommend. I do want to point that out as well. Sometimes, again, it's just informational. So if your school's philosophy is anybody can take honors that wants to take honors, you can still use recommendations if you want, if your team agrees to that. Your teachers could still go in and they can make their recommendations. And then on that screen here, the student will see that they've been recommended, but whether they've been recommended or not, get in there, the recommendation will show up over here if they have. But if there's no prerequisite rule of teacher recommendation, anyone will be able to select that. But the kids who've been recommended, it'll say that over here. And that's helpful, I think, even if you're not using a prereq rule, because maybe you want the kids who were recommended for honors to know that, and you want to, and that's an encouragement to have them select honors versus regular. Because something I haven't really addressed yet, and I'll just address it real quickly here, is that the way I've set this up, any student going to ninth grade can select regular English 9. We do, and something, I did say this a little bit earlier, something some buildings do, but it's very rare, is recommend or put prereq rules or teacher recommend prereq rules on all of the courses. So the kids can only select what they're recommended for. So honors ready kids are only recommended for this. Kids who are non-honors are only recommended for this, and they can't select what they haven't been recommended for. I have seen that done, but it's rare. That means if you set it up that way, where every English class requires a recommendation, including the gen ed class, then every single student needs some kind of recommendation. Because what you don't want on the day that the portal opens is for students to have nothing to select, because they really would see all blanks here for checkboxes, and they cannot submit the requests unless they've met every one of these requirements. Questions on teacher recommendations? Again, that doc is available in our documentation. Highly recommend getting that out to all your teachers if your school uses recommendations. This note up here, again, is for schedulers. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just want you to know that if you are using teacher recommendations on students coming from another building, so I'll use current 8th graders going into 9th grade, teachers can only recommend for courses that appear in the catalog in their own building. Example, if I'm an 8th grade teacher recommending a current 8th grader for Honors English 9, then my middle school has to have Honors English 9 in our catalog. And that's an important note. It doesn't really align with everything else I've told you, but it's just one of those things about PowerScheduler. It's that even though those kids are requesting courses for their next school, the high school in this case, the 8th grade still has to, the teachers still have to be able to see the 9th grade courses. And therefore, those 9th grade courses they're recommending for have to be available in their building. Questions on that? All right. Lastly, there is a document out there in our documentation. Can't recommend this one enough. It is called, and this is one that I believe one of my team members popped in the chat earlier, before students start making recommendations. And it's, again, a very helpful document. It is a checklist. One of the pieces on that checklist is this right here. This is one of the last things you're going to do. When you're ready to open that portal, you're going to check that box, you're going to hit submit. And if you've done everything else on that checklist, students and parents will be able to make their selections. Then when the deadline hits, and in my example, I said the deadline was February 2nd, I will uncheck that box, I will submit, and now students can no longer access the request screen via the public portal. But that before students start making requests document is going to give you a list of, I believe, 8 steps, some of which you've already completed. Some you completed during the automated scheduler setup, some you completed on your own, some you will need to complete on the day before you open up the portal, or the day of in this case. So kind of use that as your final check before you're ready to open the portal. And then once you do, we like these PSCB custom reports over here. There are some great reports. I like to use this one, course requests by student or course. I don't have any data in here. Well, actually, yeah, I do, because I did add some earlier, didn't I? So I'll go ahead and select that. So I'm going to be able to track which kids have selected, which kids have submitted course requests. And this is filterable by student. It's filterable by course name, as well as other parameters as well that you can. So you can export this. You can make this your current selection if you want to look at these particular students. So great report once you start getting requests. I like to kind of see what classes are getting a lot of requests. If I'm in a high school, especially, which electives maybe. It's helpful data there. The other one, in my opinion, equally important, is student no schedule requests. Let's say that it's February 2nd and I've shut down the portal, and I'm assuming every kid who is going to school here next year has made the requests, but we all know that's not true. Some students will miss the deadline. We'll have to track those students down and get their requests. But this is a great report. I'm not going to click into it because I don't want to see, 100 or 600 kids in my selection. No schedule course requests is going to be any student who has no requests on them, which means they didn't get into the request screen and submit. Or maybe they had trouble submitting because of a teacher recommendation or a prerequisite or account access issue, potentially. And that would be a way to find out who needs help. Invalid schedule requests, the final one I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'm going to talk about one more. Lied. Invalid schedule requests is a helpful one because once you start getting requests, if you click into there and there are requests that appear on that list, chances are they've withdrawn from your building, or they've been set to a different next school, or they're set not to schedule, but somehow they have requests on them. So a good checkpoint there. And the very last one, I promise, I'm going to talk about is recommendations. If you end up using the teacher recommendations, this is a great way to see every student who's been recommended for any course. I don't know that I'll have any in here. No, I don't. So once your teachers start submitting recommendations, this is searchable by student, by teacher, by their current course that they're recommended out of, or the course that they're recommended for. So another great report.
Hey, Stephen, this is Tara. Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah, of course. I was just gonna, you beat me to it. I was gonna say, what questions do you all have? And there, here you are.
I actually have two, and another one popped in my head.
Okay.
So if t students choose an alternate course, if we have that section, um, how does it so our administrators then pull the tallies of how many students signed up for each course, and then they determine how many sections we're offering. So are the alternate courses listed in that same tally, or is it a different tally?
That's a great question. Some of the reports indicate whether it's an alternate and some do not.
Okay.
And off the top of my head, I don't remember. Okay, this is a good one. In that way, anyway. Again, this is the one that I prefer. Now, this becomes a long, long list once I get a bunch of requests in here, so it does take a moment to load. But I just like
then
this
you can
report. Yeah, I
oh,
could
I
select.
see. Cool.
I could select alternate.
Okay, so you're just PSC and then
Yeah. Yep.
request by
PSCB
student.
reports.
Okay.
Request by student or course.
Okay.
And this
And then
request
yeah,
tally
I've used
might,
that a lot.
yeah, this might have it. I can't remember. We can take a look. Yes, it'll indicate alternate right here. So
Oh
you can
yeah,
filter
and then
those
you
out.
can just search. Okay. Okay,
Yep.
cool. And then my other question is, I was putting a prerequisite of a teacher recommendation on one of our new classes.
Yeah.
But how can I'm not exactly sure how the teacher who needs to recommend the kids is coded. Like, how would I find that in PowerSchool, like under the teacher's name? You know what I mean? Like, if there's only like one specific person, and so I don't want somebody else to like recommend them. So, like, I don't know if she's a CTA or a business or like, I don't know
Oh,
how she's
oh,
coded.
I see I think I know what you're asking. So you want to know
Like, what
what department?
department? Yeah.
Department. Okay. So we're going to go to the live side. And I'm going to switch to staff. I'm going to find that teacher's name. And then I'm going to go to their schedule setup.
Oh, schedule setup. Did I have that? Okay, schedule. Oh, schedule setup.
And so
Cool.
this
Okay,
teacher doesn't have a department on them, so I would
got
just
it.
designate them to one.
Yeah, but I see it. I was close. I was close to
Yeah.
finding it, but not
Yep.
exactly. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Any other questions before we're done today? Some good questions there. Again, as I said at the top, let's see. The work days, virtually and in person, are great places to fine tune your request screens. And I can't recommend those enough. So if you would like to come out to one of those, we have our hourly sessions virtually every week beginning in January. And then we have our in-persons that Kim and Mark mentioned earlier, beginning in mid-January as well, if you can make it to our Columbus or Marion offices. We are up in Northeast Ohio a couple of times in the spring like we were last year, if that's closer to where you are. So we look forward to working with you guys. Thanks for coming.